Hello everyone, thank you for coming to this video, and in this video I will introduce pharmacoepidemiology, and this video is part of a lecture for public health pharmacy with pharmacoepidemiology at Department of Pharmacy, University of San Carlos, Philippines. In this video I will explain about the position of pharmacoepidemiology related to two other disciplines, which are epidemiology and clinical pharmacology, and then we will move to the historical the history aspect of pharmacoepidemiology from the perspective of its development in the US, and then we will close with the potential contributions of pharmacoepidemiology to the society. So let's go to the definition. By definition, pharmacoepidemiology is the study of the use of and the effects of drugs in large numbers of people. So I make some phrases as bold to highlight the importance of those phrases. So in pharmacoepidemiology, we study about the use of drugs as well as the effects of drugs. For the effects of drugs, we can study the beneficial effects as well as the adverse effects of drugs. And it should be noted that the study of pharmacoepidemiology require large numbers of people. How large is large? It's not easy to say that. So it depends on the setting, and usually in developing countries, just like in Indonesia, it's not easy to gather a lot of data, while in developed countries such as European countries or the Northern Americas, they can use the existing databases, the integrated databases, to collect data or to retrieve data from many patients, so hundred thousands or probably millions. So that's pharmacoepidemiology by definitions. There is an alternative definition for this. It's simply the application of epidemiologic methods to the content area of clinical pharmacology. So like what I said before, the pharmacoepidemiology are closely related with two other disciplines, epidemiology and clinical pharmacology. So let's move to see what are these disciplines. So pharmacoepidemiology, like what I said before, is the application of epidemiologic methods to the content area of clinical pharmacology, while the epidemiology is the study of the distribution. Second, words that is important is determinants of diseases in populations. We will look for this further in the next slide. And then also clinical pharmacology is the study of the study of the effects of drugs in humans. Usually we use pharmacology as the study of the effects of drugs. With the word clinical, it means that it applies to humans. So in epidemiology, we learn about disease, whether it is infectious or communicable diseases, whether they are chronic diseases or injuries. So that's the diseases that usually can be grouped. And then the distribution can be viewed from times, persons, places, and classes of people affected, or we can say as a population or subpopulation. And then in the distribution, we have some measures and usually it can be prevalence, incidence, mortality rate, and so on. So that's about the distribution that we can learn from epidemiology. And then the determinants, there are many determinants of health, including the biological, chemical, physical, sociocultural, and then economic, genetic, just the was the genetic related diseases, something like that, or hereditary diseases, and also behavior and environment. So because pharmacoepidemiology is the study of the use of and effects of drugs in large number of people, so it obviously becomes the subset of epidemiology. So it can be illustrated just like this Venn diagram. So what kind of study designs that we can apply to pharmacoepidemiology from the epidemiology? So there are many study designs, but generally in the clinical research methodology, we learn about case reports, case series, and then analysis of secular trends, or usually it is called as they are called as ecological studies, and then case control studies, cohort studies, and randomized clinical trials. So in these study designs, only the randomized clinical trials that are categorized as an experimental study, while the others are the observational studies. So we will learn this in the I think in the next two meetings. Then we will we will take a look about clinical pharmacology. So just like pharmacology, the pharmacology, clinical pharmacology also has interest in the pharmacokinetics. So I'm sure that you understand about this. This is the study of the relationship between the dose administered of a drug and the serum or blood level achieved. So in short terms, in short definition, we can say that what the body does to the drug, that's pharmacokinetics. And also ADME, the absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretions. And pharmacodynamics. Pharmacodynamics is the study of the relationship between the drug level and drug effect. So it is what the drug does to the human body. So the clinical pharmacology is pharmacology that is applied to human. So usually the participants of the study in clinical pharmacology are human. And in clinical pharmacology, the central focus is individualized therapy. And because of that, it needs a determination of risk or benefit ratio specific to the patient. So we understand that between one patient and the other patient has different needs. So that's why in clinical pharmacology we can have studies that can answer the questions, and also needs to be aware if the clinical condition of the patient may modify the good therapeutic effect of the selected drugs. For example, if someone is a fast metabolizer, so then the drug that given to them probably cannot act just like what what is expected, because it will rapidly metabolized by their body. So how is the relationship between pharmacoepidemiology and clinical pharmacology? So let's take a look for an example. In a patient with a serious infection and also severe liver impairment and mild renal disorder, there is a question: is gentamicin a good choice to treat the infection? So we know that gentamicin may cause a small risk of causing renal disease. So in this patient that has a serious liver impairment, will the risk become greater? So in this case, pharmacoepidemiology can help clinical pharmacology. Pharmacoepidemiology encompasses elements of both pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, but usually it does not require to measure the drug levels, just like what the clinical pharmacology does. So it is usually try to understand the impact or the effect of the use of the drugs in the populations, but it is usually the dose is usually involved, but it does not require the measurement of drug levels in every individuals participated in the study. So it's quite different with clinical pharmacology. And it should be remembered that pharmacoepidemiology in the beginning has primarily concerned with the adverse drug effects, and also we will learn about this later. So adverse drug effects we can also called as adverse drug reactions, or shortly adverse reactions, but this should be differentiated from the adverse events, because in the concept of adverse drug reactions we clearly have a conclusion that there is a causal relationship. So causal relationship, there's very strong relationship between the reaction and a particular drug, while in the adverse events we are not sure that there is a causal relationship, but they can be related between the reaction and also the particular drugs. So in this sense, the study of the pharmacoepidemiology study that focuses on adverse drug effects is called pharmacovigilance. We will study it later. And we now move to the second part, the historical background of pharmacoepidemiology in the context of the US, because I use the reference from the US. So the early legislation in the US before the born of pharmacoepidemiology, in there they have in 1906 the Pure Food and Drug Act. At that time, the food and drug usually misbranded. So what they claim as the effects of or the benefits of their food and drugs do not need to include efficacy and safety requirements. So just only toxicity testing that usually required to have approval for marketing these products. In 1938, there was a Food and Drug Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act because of as a response from a tragedy that more than 100 people died from renal failure due to elixir of sulfanilamide dissolved in diethylene glycol. So sulfanilamide is antibiotics, and it is at that time it is very useful to treat infections. So the disadvantages from the formulation of sulfanilamide is that it is not easy to be dissolved in the water. So in the formulation process, they use diethylene glycol instead of water. But then, because of this solvent, many people died from the formulation. And in 1950s, there is a discovery of aplastic anemia because of chloramphenicol, and in 1961, and I think you already heard about this, there is a drug crisis. It is called as a Thalidomide Disaster. So thalidomide is a drug for morning sickness, so it is intended to be used for pregnant women, and it is very popular. And fortunately, in the US, they do not approve this thalidomide, but in Europe and other parts of the world, many pregnant women administer thalidomide, and because of this, many babies born with what we call as phocomelia. So because of this, then there is a requirement for proof of drug safety before a drug is marketed. It needs preclinical, pharmacologic and toxicologic testing. So this is just like I got these pictures from the internet, so it's really a disaster. Thalidomide, and then this is the drugs, and there are many brands of this particular drug. As a result from thalidomide crisis, then the regulatory authority concerns about some drug crisis. Some of them are in this slide. In 1917s, there was cleoquinol that caused subacute myelooptic neuropathy, and then also the exposure of the ethylstilbestrol in utero. It means that when a pregnant mother consume the ethylstilbestrol, but it failed to prevent. The ethylstilbestrol is for contraception, but when it fails, then the babies from the mother can be exposed to the ethylstilbestrol, and later in their life, when they're born, they will have risk to develop adenocarcinoma of the cervix and vagina. And in 1980s, there are some drugs, and 90s there are some drugs as well that needs to be evaluated. As a result from this history, we now have a clear pathway when drug will be marketed. So this is the requirements from the preclinical animal experiments to clinical studies, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. After phase 3, the drug can be marketed if the drug is successfully approved, and then pharmacoepidemiology can support in this the fourth phase. So the pharmacoepidemiology is located in this phase. Okay, so now let's move to the last part of this video. We will talk about I will talk about the potential contributions of pharmacoepidemiology to the society. So the first potential contribution is that the information that supplements the information available from pre-marketing studies, such as the better quantifications of the incidence of non-adverse and beneficial effects. So let's see this diagram again. So in the phase 1 to phase 3 the clinical studies, the manufacturer or the researchers want to know what kind of adverse and also beneficial effects of the drugs. So this is in terms of drug safety and drug efficacy. But let's say but in until the phase 3, as you can see here, there will be only about 4,000 subjects or 4,000 participants involved in the study. Would they represent all people in the world? As of course they wouldn't, but this can be said as a large number of participants, yes. But the drug, the safety and efficacy profile of the drugs is not enough when it is just obtained from the clinical test from phase 1 to phase 3. So we will keep following the safety and efficacy profile of the drug until the phase 4. So the pharmacoepidemiology can add or can supplement the informations from the non-adverse and also beneficial effects that are gathered from the phase 1 to phase 3 clinical studies of the drug. With this, we will have a higher precision data, and also for patients that are not studied prior to the marketing. For example, the subpopulation of elderly, children, and pregnant women, because normally in the clinical test for phase 1 to phase 3, they usually only use the adult populations. In the phase 1, they use the healthy participants. In the second phase, they use the patients, but in a small number. And in the phase 3, they will involve the larger number of participants, but they all normally adult. So elderly, children, and pregnant women will not involved in these clinical studies, because usually it's not easy to get ethical clearance for those populations. And also the information from pharmacoepidemiology can be used to study the what is it the effects that can be modified by other drugs. We call it usually with drug interactions or other analysis. Also, in pharmacoepidemiology, we can compare the effectiveness or the safety profile of the studied drugs relative to other drugs, whether they are in the same pharmacologic class or even in the chemical class. And then the second contribution is new types of information that is not available from pre-marketing studies. This is possible because in the market, the number of users of the drugs, or we can call the patients, are far larger from the participants in the phase 3 clinical study. So because the number of the users increase significantly in the market, we can detect the rare and also the very rare adverse events, or even adverse drug reactions, or even the potential for the potential benefit from the drugs that are not known from the previous clinical studies. So also we can study with pharmacoepidemiology about the patterns of drug utilization and also the drug overdoses, because in the clinical studies usually they use the randomized clinical trials, and in these randomized clinical trials the dose is controlled, while when the drug enters the market, they can be used just like it's not easy to control the dose by the patient, so overdose can be happen, and yeah, it can add more information, and also the economic implications of drug use usually compared to other drugs in the same pharmacologic actions or in the same chemical structure. And then the other contributions can be said as general contributions. There are two contributions. The first is about reassurances about drug safety, because mainly pharmacoepidemiology concerns about drug safety, and then the fulfillment of ethical and legal obligations. So that's all about the introduction to pharmacoepidemiology, and we continue. If you have questions, please take note, and we will discuss it in our synchronization. Thank you for watching, and I hope this video is beneficial for you. Thank you so much.